businesses over the last 25 years. The first business went out of business. The second business, I was kicked out by my two partners about 2 weeks before my first son was born. And the third business, which I actually started 2 weeks after my first son was born, fortunately, in July of 1999, I was able to sell that business. I was able to pay back the bank the $1.3 million I owed them. And my wife tells me I got her back just about the same time. So that's a little bit about what my journey has been as an entrepreneur. Let me see if I can get the thing forward. I can forward my slides. Having a little bit of a problem here. Oh, there we go. So this presentation, this webinar is not really going to have a lot of fluff. Although marshmallow fluff is my drug of choice when things get rough, it's going to have actual things that you actually can do to beat the cash crunch. So you're not up all night worrying about it. However, in order to get to that place, I've got to get you outside of your comfort zone. You see, because that's not where the magic happens. You know, we go to work every day. We do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And somehow, some way, we expect to get different results. Albert Einstein said that this was the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different results. So in order for me to get you outside your comfort zone, I'm going to ask you to do something that probably no one has ever asked you before, especially on a webinar of this type. What I want you to do is I want you to strive for minimal achievement. And what do I mean by striving for minimal achievement? Well, there are these two monks. They're sitting by a river, and they're talking about the sheer power of their Zen masters, of their teachers. The first one says, "My Zen master, he's so powerful, he can walk across the bridge. He can walk across the river without using a bridge." In other words, he walks on water. He's so powerful. The other Zen monk says, "My Zen master, he's so powerful that when he chops wood, he chops wood. When he cooks rice, he cooks rice." Now, what I take away from that story is the incredible power we can get if we focus on one thing at a time. And that's what striving for minimal achievement really is about. I'm going to give you a lot of advice on how to beat the cash crunch, and you're going to take a lot of notes. But the problem is, if you try to focus on too many different things, you go to work tomorrow and nothing happens. Pick the one change that you want to make. This is how you can strive for minimal achievement and actually get some change in your business life. Now, it's pretty obvious, but every single small business goes out of business for exactly the same reason. There's only one reason: they run out of cash flow. Now, this whole idea of understanding cash flow and financial statements is actually very personal to me. You see, in 1999, when I sold my last business, I actually lost $1 million off the sale price of that business because I couldn't read what was on my balance sheet. I couldn't understand every single number on the balance sheet. And this is hard, and I couldn't read it. And I actually had an MBA from Northwestern University, Kellogg School of Management. Now, while this is not an advertisement, definitely not advertising for them, it shows how difficult this is. And most small business owners are ill-equipped to really understand cash flow in their business. Now, cash flow is of importance. It really reminds me in 1992 when former President Clinton ran for office for the first time, his campaign manager hung a sign in his office that said, "It's the economy, stupid." And that was a sign that was hanging there so everyone remember the only thing that this election is really about is the economy. And so I kind of took my cue from that sign, and every small business I ever had, I always had a sign hanging in my office that said, "It's cash flow, stupid." To remember all the financial decisions we make have to really depend on cash flow. Now, cash is not only king, but it's queen, ace, jack, every other face card in the deck. We have to understand that cash is not the same as profits. Profits are just on paper. Cash is what you have in the bank at the end of the month. That is why cash is more important than profits. We have to understand that sales is vanity and cash flow is really sanity. Now, we have to set up certain procedures in our business to be able to make sure we have enough cash flow so we can meet all of our obligations. And things like how much inventory you have, how often your customers pay you, how often do you pay customers, all these things affect cash flow. I remember that I used to use a service called ADT. It was a security service, and I used to pay $29 at the beginning of every single month. And then a couple of years into using them, I got a letter from the company saying that for my convenience, instead of charging me $29 a month, they were going to charge me $89 every 3 months. And so it would be more convenient for me if I only paid every 3 months in advance than every single month. And I looked at that and I said to myself, for my convenience, they're really doing it for cash flow because they're collecting their money 60 days early. And that's what we have to understand. It's difficult for a lot of small business owners because there's a joke that goes, as a small business owner, I sleep like a baby. I go to bed early and I wake up at midnight screaming my head off. And as I survey small business owners, the things that they are most worried about is money and cash flow in their business. Now, most of us who have problems in this area, we didn't get here overnight. This is something that's been building up for a while. And the first place where you look and where the problem is when our expenses exceed our income. If we're losing money in our business, we're more than likely going to have negative cash flow rather than positive cash flow to start. Many times we get here because our prices are too low. Small business owners really, unfortunately, don't like rejection, so they have a tendency not to charge a lot of money for their products or service, at least not up to the value, or they offer too many discounts. They don't really understand what their true street price really is. A lot of times we get here in a cash flow crunch because our overhead is too high. The overhead is the expenses you need to pay every single month, regardless of what the sales is. And when sales dip, the overhead expenses don't dip, and that causes a loss. We get here in a cash flow crunch because we pay our bills way too early. I don't mean not paying them on time within terms, but we pay them when we get them, and that's convenient. That's not smart. Or it takes a long time for our customers actually to pay us, and we have to chase them for the money. And probably most importantly, we get in this place because a long time ago, we outsourced the financial knowledge in our business. We said, well, I don't need to look at the financial statements every single month. I can just send the information to my accountant and he'll tell me whatever I need to know. And it doesn't work like that because you really, if you don't have your financial statements every single month, if you don't understand how much cash you have and where it's going, you're never going to be able to really grow your business. So the first thing you really need to understand is what really is your basic model, your basic revenue model for your business. And I suggest that there has to be some kind of bottoms-up approach. You have to understand how many customers do you really have? What is your average revenue per customer? And I would tell you that a lot of small business owners don't really understand what their average revenue is per customer, or more importantly, what their LTV is, what the lifetime value is of that customer, perhaps over 2 or 3 years. You also need to understand, what does it cost to actually provide your product or your service? Remember, the higher the gross margin you have, the more of a chance you have in actually making money and having a healthy cash flow. You also need to understand, what does it really cost to acquire a customer? If I'm selling a customer a service of $100 and it costs me $80 to acquire that customer, that might not be a profitable business model. And then if you're selling a product, you have to understand how much money you're actually spent on product development, and what does the ROI look like that? How many of that product do you have to sell to actually make money? Now, your model could be anything. I was in Paris last year for my 25th wedding anniversary, and we went in this place called the Kilo Shop. And it was interesting is they didn't have price tags on their products associated with pounds. I'm sorry, associated with the euro. They actually price things according to how much the clothing weighed, which I thought was very interesting. And then somewhere along the line, they had figured out the weight and how much it could really sell for. But that was just another interesting way to really do it. You should be able to understand your business on a napkin. It should be very, very simple. I should be able to ask you, tell me how you make money. And you should be able to write that on a napkin. It should not be complicated because there's only so many business models that are really out there. So for example, in a consulting services model, always you charge the customer a certain amount of money, say $100, for your company to perform a service. You then hire someone for $30 or $40 to do that service. And therefore, the gross margin on each hour is $60 or $70. So you can only grow your business if you hire more people and you have a good margin. Now, when you sell a product, it usually works a little bit differently. You either manufacture the product yourself or you go source the product from someone, and let's say that costs $20 and you sell it for $40. So the more products you get or the faster your product can turn in inventory, you can make more money. Intellectual property works a little bit different way. Let's say that I'm a video game company. I spend a lot of money developing the video game up front. Every single time I sell that intellectual property through some kind of download, it costs me almost nothing. And so that's a different kind of model that has a lot of leverage, but a lot of investment up front. Or you could have a model where you corner the market on distribution, where that is really what your competitive advantage is how your product gets distributed. Or you can have a model which is really an annuity, and this is the razor and razor blade type of model, or the smartphone model, where you spend a very small amount of money up front for the razor or for the smartphone, but then the company charges you every single month for the service, and you don't start at the beginning of the month over again. Someone signs up for 12 months and you have ongoing customers. So first you really have to understand, how does your business actually really work? Now we have to understand, if you're going to grow your business as a small business owner, you really need to see that it actually cash, because if you grow your business and you give people terms, receivables are naturally going to go up. You're probably going to need more inventory if you sell a product, and you're probably going to need more working capital in order to pay your bills and keep the company growing. So to make money, you've got to be able to track a couple different things on a monthly basis. And I stress that this is really on a monthly basis because a lot of people get lazy, and what they do is they say, well, no, I don't need to do it on a monthly basis. I can do it on a quarterly or yearly basis, or guess what? I can do it every single time that I file taxes on an annual basis. It doesn't work that way, because if you don't know where you've been, you really won't know where you're going. So there's a couple of key things you need to understand. I'm going to go through each of these things. One is the profit and loss statement, or some people call this the income statement, then the balance sheet, then the cash flow statement. You have to understand key metrics that are really important for your business, and I'll give you several right here. You have to really understand, how does this month compare to last month at the same time, because a lot of businesses are seasonal, or how does this month compare to what your budget was? And then how do things really compare year to date, year to year? So if we're looking at this at the end of May, you look at, well, how are the first 5 months of this year, and how is it compared to the first 5 months of last year, to give you some kind of context? Because remember, by themselves, financial statements a lot of times can't give you all the information that you need. Here's the stat: surveyed thousands and thousands of small business owners over the last 15 years, and only 50% of them can actually read a profit and loss statement. 25% can actually read a balance sheet, and only 5% can actually read a cash flow statement. And when I do this presentation live, I ask to show a show of hands, I test people, and these numbers always ring true. So let's talk about, what does a profit and loss statement mean? Simply put, it is the amount of money, the amount of profit that your company made over a certain period of time. Now, this can be looked at on a cash basis, or it can be looked at on an accrual basis. A cash basis is typically, I only record the revenue and the expenses when I actually receive the cash or actually pay the bills. On an accrual basis, I actually record the income when I bill the customer, and I record the expenses when I actually incur that expense. So this is your typical profit and loss statement or income statement. It has a couple things, and yours may vary. It has a couple things that all of them are going to have. First of all, it has your operating income or your sales. And many times it has it for the current period and year-to-date period. Any accounting system worth its salt can actually produce this financial statement. But what you have to remember is it's garbage in, garbage out. So the information doesn't mean anything unless it's done correctly. So typically it has your sales as the first item, minus what it costs to actually provide that product or service. And then it has your gross profit or gross income. You then have other operating expenses it takes to run your business. And then finally, sometimes tax solicits, sometimes not, you have your net income. So this is important. And the things you should look for are revenue. What I sell last month compared to what did I sell last year? What is my gross margin? As I said before, if you have a higher gross margin, like 80%, you have much more of a chance of making a good profit. If you're in a business where your gross margin is only 20%, you're going to have a really hard time making any kind of profit. And so what you have to do is you've got to examine your fixed expenses. And as I said, these are the over expenses that are there no matter what your sales are. These are like rent. These could be telephone service. These could be employees. And then there are the variable expenses, which usually are your cost of goods or cost of service. They're only there when you actually sell the product. The more that you convert more of your expenses into variable versus fixed, the higher your success rate would be. And a lot of people have done that recently by hiring freelancers or outsourcing different things instead of having employees. Or instead of having rent, they go to a shared space, so they work out of a coffee shop or something like that. Again, the numbers alone don't tell the whole story. You have to look at percentages. So for example, what percent is marketing of the total sales? What percent is people of the total sales? Those kinds of things. And the good part is that you need to look at the trends. Where is the business going? I tell a lot of folks is you can't get nervous over 1 week's results or 1 month's results. And in some businesses, even a quarterly result. You've got to see what the trend really is. There's a lot of analysis you can do here. As I said before, you can look at accrual basis versus cash basis, what your budget is versus what you actually did versus last year, what the year-to-date numbers are. And I'll stress one more time, any kind of fixed expenses, you want to keep it as low as possible. And any variable expenses, you want to shift as many fixed expenses into variable expenses. So there's a typo on this thing. It should say, what does the balance sheet mean? Not does the balance sheet mean? What does the balance sheet mean? It's at a given point in time, what are the assets of my business, which is basically what do I own? This is typically cash and accounts receivable. What do I owe people? This is liabilities. This is typically loans to the bank or payables to vendors. And what's left over, which is really the equity, which is really the, since this beginning of this year, what's really the net profit. So this is typically how a balance sheet looks. You have your current assets, which is your cash of all your different bank accounts. You have your accounts receivable, the money that is owed to you by customers. You have your inventory, the value of your inventory if you sell products. Those are the short-term assets. And then the long-term assets are your property, equipment, and land, other things that you're going to be depreciating. On the other side is really the liabilities. This is really what you owe. These are your accounts payable, any kind of short-term debt, any kind of long-term debt, and then the difference really is your equity. So what you really look for, probably the most important thing to notice on your balance sheet is what is your quick ratio. Your quick ratio is your current assets divided by your current liabilities. So let's say that your current assets, you have $100,000 in the bank and your liabilities are $50,000. 100,000 divided by 50,000 is 2. And so what this says is what is your ability, what is your current ability on a certain date to be able to cover all of the liabilities in your business? You have more cash than you have liabilities, or do you have more liabilities than cash? So in this one case, you actually have $100,000 in the bank and $50,000 in accounts payable. So your current ratio is 2. That means you have double the amount of money in your assets than you do on your liabilities. In most businesses, you want to make sure that that current ratio is greater than 1. That tells you and the bank that you have enough money to cover all of your current liabilities. The second thing is, do you understand what every number actually means on the balance sheet? Because it's hard, it's easy to skip over things. And what I really look at is, when I look at a balance sheet, I see, are there negative numbers where positive numbers should be, and are there positive numbers where negative numbers should be? So for example, when I have an expense that's a negative, that doesn't really make any sense. That means that that expense owes us. Now, it could be a credit, but a lot of times it is really a mistake. And again, with the balance sheet, you can really look at this over time. And do you really understand what the trends are? All right, so let's look at cash flow statement. It's a reality that you can pretty much have the profit and loss statement, the balance sheet, say almost anything you want, depending on how you parse it or phrase it or what time period that you really look at. The cash flow statement is the only statement that you just can't lie, because it's based on what's happened with cash. So you have to understand in your business what really are the sources of cash. Any cash flow statement is going to have 3 sources of cash. The first one being whatever, you can get cash from operating activities, you can get cash from your investing activities, or you can get cash from your financing activities. Most small businesses will get money from their operating activities and their financing activities. And so this is really what a cash flow statement looks like. Again, any accounting software will produce this, but I want you to understand how to read the cash flow statement, because it is the most difficult. So the first thing that's always on the cash flow statement is your net profit. And what the cash flow statement tries to do is it tries to reconcile your profit and loss statement. Says you have $22,000 worth of profit, and how come you don't have $23,000 in the bank? And this is because things have happened with your accounts receivable, your accounts payable, your inventory, and perhaps your financing activities. So this is a little bit counterintuitive, and so I want to take you through it fairly slowly. So when accounts receivable actually goes up, when the change from the 1st of the month to the 31st of the month, that's usually what a cash flow statement is run on. It's run over a period of time. If the accounts receivable number is positive, that means accounts receivable went up. And when accounts receivable goes up, that is actually a use of cash. It's a use of cash because people are either taking longer to pay you, or they're not paying you right now. So when accounts receivable goes up, you're actually not getting your cash today, you're going to get it tomorrow, so it's a use of cash. However, when accounts payable, the money that you owe other people actually goes up, that's actually a source of cash, because you're not paying people today, you're paying them tomorrow. The best example of that is using a charge card. You go to the store, use a charge card, that's like a personal account payable, where you're going to go out and pay that in 30 days, and you preserve the cash that's currently in your bank account. Finally, when inventory goes up, that is also a use of cash, because you have more money invested in your inventory. And I'm going to talk about strategies here to actually correct each one of those. So ideally, you want accounts receivable to go down, accounts payable to go up, and inventory to go down. That's the ideal. But it doesn't always happen, because based on where your business is. So let's talk about some strategies actually to improve your cash flow and escape the cash flow crunch. So the first thing really is to set the days sales outstanding goal. This is the DSO. How many days does it take actually for you to collect the money from your customers on average? The lower that number is, the more cash you'll get into the bank. So let me give you an example. Let's say on average you do $50,000 a month in sales, and on average it takes you a month to collect that money from your customers. If you could cut that to 2 weeks, you would actually bring in half of that $50,000 that's always outstanding. You would, on a one-time basis, increase your cash flow by $25,000. And that's $25,000 that you can do anything you want with that you didn't have before. You also have to be able to collect your money early and often. Most people want to pay their bills, and you have to have a process which you go out and collect the bill. And the best practice usually is when you send the bill, you have someone follow up to make sure the bill was received. You then ask, when is this bill scheduled to be paid? When it's to be paid, you call a couple days or a week ahead of time and say, is it still scheduled to be paid on this date? And if they say yes, if you don't get it a few days after that date, you call them again. In this case, the squeaky wheel always gets the grease. Don't be afraid to ask for your money. You did the work, you deserve to be paid. And in order for you to meet your obligations, you got to be able to have the necessary cash flow, and that's collecting your accounts receivable. We also have to understand that credit is a privilege. It's a privilege. Everybody shouldn't be entitled to it. In fact, if you can use a credit card, if everyone can pay up front, that's even the best way. And I suggest implementing some kind of finance charge if people do not pay on time. Now, I don't mean that you'll necessarily ever collect that financial charge. When people get statements where they see there's a financial charge, they're more likely to go out and pay that bill. Remember, customers that don't pay on time are not good customers. If they don't pay on time, then you're actually acting as a bank for them. And unless your company ends in bank and trust, you shouldn't be a bank for your customers. Now, if you can't get all your money up front, what I suggest is try to get them to commit to some kind of monthly installment plan, so eventually over a certain period of time, it would actually get paid. Now, to improve your accounts receivable, what you can do is you can earn better credit terms. This doesn't mean you should grab better credit terms. You should always ask for as long terms as possible. Can you get 45 days? Can you get 60 days? Can you get 75? Can you get 90 days? And once you pay on time, you can always ask for another 15 days, and you'd be surprised how many people would give that to you. Most businesses, of course, care about their cash flow, but more importantly, they want to know exactly when they're going to be paid so they can plan on it. The more cash you can keep in your business and push out paying your bills on time, the better off you're going to be. And you're only going to get this if you develop trust and actually make systematic kinds of payments. If you carry inventory, it can be a very large expense, because remember, the item sitting in your inventory is cash that you don't have access to. And as inventory goes up, you're going to have access to less cash. So you really have to look at three different things. How often does your inventory turn? In other words, when I take an item in inventory, how long does it sit there until it's sold? Remember, the faster inventory turns, the less your cash actually be sitting in inventory. And you do this by looking at your reorder points, at what point should I actually reorder that product, and how many should I order at that time. And this is a very complicated metrics based on what the history is. But again, a lot of accounting systems will give you advice in this area, how to set those based on what kind of service you want to have and what type of fill rate you want to have when a customer calls. The fill rate is how often, what percent of the time is that product actually in stock when the customer orders it. There are also ways really to reduce your overhead. We already talked about variable. If you can get employees or contractors or freelancers to be available when you need them and only pay them when you need them, that is the optimal situation. That's not always possible depending on where your business is, but that is something you definitely need to look at. Or you can outsource things to actually only pay when the sales are really there. Unless you're a retail store, since everyone can work mobily these days, pay as little rent as you can. And also hire an accountant, because they can also help you figure out how you actually can save money. And finally, one of the ways to actually reduce your overhead is to lower your employee turnover. We have to understand that employees coming and going, and most employees stay in a small business less than 2 years. And when an employee leaves, it actually costs you 30% of their salary to replace them. It is very, very expensive. We need to have some kind of cash flow plan, and this is really the way that you do it. You should project your monthly sales, whether in a budget or annual budget or on a monthly basis, and do it fairly conservatively. Then take a look at what your receivables are, what changes there will be in inventory, how much money you need to pay, and then adjust for growth. So again, see what your sales are, see how much receivables are going to come in that given month, how much more money you need to invest in inventory, what bills you need to pay this month, adjust it for growth, and that should give you a general idea of what your cash flow plan really is. The bottom line is, this is really your perfect cash flow process, right? You want to generate revenue, right? You look at the number of leads, what's really your close rate, what's the price per transaction, do you retain customers, and then you need to control costs by having more variable than fixed costs, and that will be more cash flow. Now, I implore you, don't outsource the math. And what I mean by outsourcing the math is, don't assume that you can leave it to your bookkeeper or your accountant so you don't have to understand it. It is very important that you understand these kinds of concepts so you can actually build and grow your business. A lot of times, small business owners say, well, I don't really need to do that because I know what the numbers are. And when anybody says that to me, I say, okay, let's look at the numbers. Let me pull the financial statements and let me give you a test. And I will say, in variable, the small business owner doesn't know their numbers 75% of the time. So what you think is actually going on in your head is not necessarily what is actually happening in your business. So it's very important to be able to look at this on a monthly basis. Let me give you a few more financial principles that are not necessarily cash flow related to add to what you should be doing. The first one is, I always have an expression that says, too much money actually makes you stupid. It doesn't mean that your business should be overcapitalized, but I find that especially when people start businesses, they have way too much money to invest, and they invest this money frivolously. It's your money. You should really be cheap. So make sure that you're spending all your money wisely. Especially when you start a business, don't put all of your money in at one time. Make sure you have, if you have $100 to spend, you put $33 in to start, you keep $33 in reserve, and you have $33 that you're never ever going to touch. Because if you have too much money, you're really going to you have a tendency to waste it. I also think that you have to be careful, if you are successful, that you don't grow yourself broke. What you have to understand is that growing businesses actually eat cash. As your business grows, you're going to need more people. It's going to be more expensive. Your accounts receivable are going to go up. Your accounts payable are going to go up. So you have to grow at a rate where you can have the capital to be able to run your business. You've got to look at your working capital, which is typically defined as your current assets minus your current liabilities. A lot of folks that start small businesses, they watch Shark Tank, they watch all these people that sold their business for $1 billion. That's not you. That happens 1 in a billion. If you build something of value in your business, you will get rich later. Focus on building value. Don't focus on getting rich. And you've got to make sure you're not focused on overnight success. I always say that most overnight successes take 7 to 10 years. Most of the folks that you ask and you see, well, they're now successful, but how long have they really been doing that? Usually a very long time. And finally, make sure that you are cheap in your business and you partner up. You don't have to take everything inside your business and have exclusive responsibility for that cost. You can partner up with other people or outsource things to make sure that you incur less of the cost. Now, one word about budgets. I know a lot of people either don't do budgets, or what they do is they do an annual budget, and then based on the results, they adjust their budget every single month because they don't want to miss their budget. Now, I know this sounds silly, but I have to tell you, I see more people doing that. You should only adjust your budget twice a year. It's based on what you did in the past and what you think you'll do forward. It's just another reference point like what you did last year. So budgets are important. It's good to have targets, but it doesn't make any sense to adjust them every month if you miss them or if you exceed them. So in conclusion, let me talk about a few action steps that you really should take. The first one really is to understand how your business makes money. This is what I was talking about from the beginning, that you've got to know what model do you fit in. Are you a services model where you have to hire more people, you pay them a certain amount of money, and you charge the customers less per hour or per job? Or are you a product-based business where you manufacture or source a certain product for a lower price and then you sell it for twice as much? Or are you an intellectual kind of model where you spend a lot of money creating some kind of intellectual property like a game, and then once you go to sell that intellectual property, it costs you very little money on each sale? The second thing, understand what the leverage points are in your business for making a profit. I have found over and over again that people don't understand that some parts of the business make money and some of them don't. Which customers are profitable, which aren't, which products or services are profitable, which are not. Because I assure you, it is not even when you go to examine your business. Finally, review and understand all three of your financial statements every month. And if you don't understand what every single number means, ask your accountant. And if your accountant makes you feel stupid or they're not willing to engage with you on you, I have to tell you, go find a new accountant. And finally, compare, contrast, understand your plan, constantly be questioning things to get a set of numbers so you can actually escape the cash crunch. Now, one reminder before we conclude. Remember what I said at the beginning. We have to strive for minimal achievement. There's a lot of power in choosing the one change you want to make. So everything I talked about, and this webinar is going to be recorded, everything that we've talked about, you can go back and just think the one change you want to make in order to get out of your cash crunch. Now, finally, I've got a new book coming out in the fall. If you would like a free copy of that book to review, it's coming out in September. All you have to do is email me at barry@moltz.com. Put in the title of that email, Get Hacks, and I'll send you a free copy of the book in September when it comes out. Kate, I really appreciate everyone talking about such an important topic, because one more thing I just got to say, Kate, remember, sales are vanity, but cash flow is sanity.
I can totally appreciate and support that. I like that last thing. That's one definitely have to kind of write down and keep hanging up in the office, I think. Thank you so much, Barry. We appreciate, all this information, and I think it's definitely important for all business owners to be able to keep in mind and really keep track of this stuff. I know I can certainly speak to falling guilty of not keeping up with it monthly, so I think that was all really great advice. So at this time, I'd like to see if anyone has any questions. You can feel free to input them into the question box, and we can move forward from there. We'll wait as some questions start to come in.
All right. This is an area, I'm glad that people are on this call, Kate, because a lot of people don't necessarily want to face the facts when it comes to cash flow.
Absolutely. We do have a question from someone asking if you could provide the email for the book that you had referenced again.
Sure. Just email me. It's at my first at my last name. So it's just Barry, BARRY, @MOLTZ.com. So I'm also going to go back to that one. If I can get back there, let's see. I'm going to go back to that screen I just put up there again with the email address. So it's barry@moltz.com, and then put in the title, Get Hacked. So it's a new book that's coming out called Small Business Hacks, 100 Shortcuts to Your Success. And it's going to tell you how to do the most important things in your business in 7 steps or less.
Perfect. That's great. So I actually have a question. One thing that I think I'd like to hear more about, obviously you go around educating small business owners about this, and I think, does anyone come to mind that you've noticed a difference, someone who maybe wasn't keeping track of all of this, didn't really keep good records, didn't have the cash flow situation, that put these tactics into practice and saw, I guess, how quickly can they see a turnaround and see more success in their business as a result of using this advice?
Yeah, you can actually see a turnaround in 90 days. It's amazing when you have the information to make a decision what you can really do with that. Because I found a lot of people, they start looking at this and they go, oh my God, I didn't realize I was spending all this money on this particular expense, or I didn't realize this customer was unprofitable, or I didn't realize this product was unprofitable. And they stop doing those things that aren't working in their business, and they start focusing on the things that really are working. It's really amazing. You can actually turn it around in 90 days. Now, hey, I'm not saying that it's not without some pain, right? Because sometimes it's astonishing when you look at it for the first time, right? So,
of course,
it does take those brave people out there. But if you want to be successful, this is one of the things you have to do. Because remember, I've had 3 businesses. I've been through all this. I try to ignore them, and you end up paying the price for it in the end.
Absolutely. No, I think that's good advice. And I guess another question, kind of as a follow-up to that, is for anyone that takes a look, finally decides to sit down, follow this advice, see how far off they are. Is it something that you believe, I guess, kind of that fear factor that first comes in? Is it something that you think just going in, tackling it, and facing it head on is probably the best tactic for somebody to use? Or how would you suggest people getting over that first initial shock, I guess, if they start to realize that they're having some issues with cash flow?
Remember, I think that the first thing you have to do, you have to strive for minimal achievement. So the poor man's cash flow is to pull out your bank statement from last month, look at the balance at the beginning of the month, and look at the balance at the end of the month. If your balance is larger at the end of the month, your company was cash flow positive during that month. If it's negative, you're cash flow negative. That's the very first thing you should do.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way. Kind of taking small steps, it sounds like.
Exactly. Strive for minimal achievement. And then work with an accountant to get your profit and loss statement together, probably on a basis, right? And if they won't help you or they make you feel stupid, Kate, you've got to find somebody else.
Yeah, so it's about surrounding yourself with the right team across the board, not just your internal team, but working with the right people who can really help you to get this, because it's not everybody's area of expertise. Well, that's great. Well,
Definitely.
I think
it's hard. It's hard, Kate, because we are not, as
Absolutely.
small business owners, we are not trained in this area. So if you don't understand it, welcome to the club.
Not always a fun club to be a part of, but one I think that it's easy to kind of get out if you start really applying these tactics and really paying attention. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Barry, for your time and for providing us with these really valuable tips. I know I learned a lot. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, we'll be sending out a replay of this webinar, so you can go back and get this information and watch it again, as well as being able to provide the contact information should you have follow-up questions for Barry. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Barry, thank you so much for all the tips, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.